Yo, Shortbox Nation, this is Botter, and I'm here to tell you right now that con season starts early this year with the return of Northeast Florida's premier anime, comic book, and sci-fi event, Collective Con. That's right, Northeast Florida's largest pop culture convention returns for its 10th year on March 8th through the 10th at the Prime Osborne Center in Jacksonville, Florida. 10 years of Collective Con, they're pulling all the stops out to make sure this is a can't-miss event. And the guest list they got going, don't even get me started on the guest list. I mean, they've got A-list celebrity guests and voice actors from some of your favorite movies, anime, and video games like Elijah Wood and Sean Ashton, Ray Park, Trisha Helfer, Ross Marquand, Max Middleman, and Bo-Katan herself will be there, Katie Sackhoff. Tell me what other convention is giving you the opportunity to meet Frodo and Sam from Lord of the Rings, Darth Maul, and One Punch Man all under the same roof. Only at Collective Con. And if you're looking to get some of your favorite comics signed, or if you want to get an original sketch from some of the best comic artists in the world, well, you're in luck, because there'll be plenty of comic and creator guests there, like DC comic artist extraordinaire Clay Mann, Harvey Award-nominated illustrator John Taylor Christopher, Marvel and DC cover artist Chris Stevens, and acclaimed Star Wars author Timothy Zahn. They'll all be at Collective Con this year. And if you're looking to bring the family, or if you want to make a weekend out of it, you're in luck, because there'll be so much going on at Collective Con that weekend in the form of vendors, fan panels, video game tournaments, cosplay contests, after parties, and a bunch of fan events. You can purchase single and 3-day weekend passes now using the link in this episode's show notes, or by going to collectivecon.com to book your tickets and hotel. Buy your tickets now, and I'll see you at Collective Con, March 8th through the 10th. Now let's start the show. In this episode of The Short Box.
One of Matthias's studies got a lot of international attention. Him and his co-authors were able to show that during the pandemic lockdown, horror fiction fans fared better emotionally than people who don't like horror fiction. When you ask yourself, well, why? I think the answer is because horror fans have already lived it. They've read The Stand. They read Andromeda Strain. They've seen Dawn of the Dead, and so I think with all that in mind, it's not that surprising to find that horror fiction fans were able to look at the threat of COVID-19 and say, okay, yeah, been there, done that, I'm ready.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Short Box Podcast.
Season 9.
Yo, check this shit out.
About to drop that comic book talk show that brings you the best.
Shortbox Podcast is recorded live from Jacksonville, Florida.
Yo, Shortbox Nation. Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 407. Thanks for joining us. If you're new, welcome to the show. This is the Shortbox Podcast, the comic book talk show that brings you the best conversations about comic books and pop culture inspired by comics.
Ever.
My name is Botter, and I've got my right-hand man, the Scottie Pippen to my Jordan, Cesar Cordero.
I'll take it,
here
man.
In the studio.
Just don't make me Tony Kukoc.
Wow, a little basketball reference at the top.
This
might be the most sports we've ever talked about.
That's about it.
407 episodes.
It ends right there.
All right. Now, normally I don't do shout-outs, a lot of shout-outs at least, during interview episodes, but this one person deserves a shout-out at the top. And I want to give a colossal shout-out to the man responsible for the new intro music you just heard. He's a longtime friend of the show. He's a music maker himself. His name is Matthew Vigo, a.k.a. Deathstroke Sound. He makes music. He does audio engineering. He does sound production for films. And he's really talented. All right?
He's Vigo.
Yeah, it's Vigo. All right. He's given us something incredible to set the tone of the show going forward for this entire season. Check him out on Instagram and online. Links to his music and his work is in the show notes. Once again, big shout outs to Matt Vigo for the new intro music. Appreciate it, brother. Now, on to the show. Today, Shortbox Nation, we've got a guest that is making his Shortbox debut today. And just in time for the spooky season.
Please don't do that. Nope. You are going to herniate a disc. Please don't do that. Is this why we have the spooky green lighting? Like, ooh,
well, you showed the spooky green lighting, which I thought was a good touch.
We've got olive skin.
But you heard a little snippet in the intro, and if you're watching the video version of this episode on YouTube, you can probably tell that this is someone we are very excited to welcome to the show. I'm talking about the acclaimed horror author and accomplished comic writer, Joe Hill. He's on the podcast today.
Yeah.
See, I already know the answer to this, but entertain me, all right? Just entertain me.
God, why?
How much do you like Joe Hill, and do you remember your first conscious exposure to him?
That sounds so lewd. I don't know why. Maybe I'm perverted for thinking that. He's looking right at me. Haven't spoken to him face to face.
He's backstage. Right? Don't ruin the
He's
facade,
a terrible person. No, he's great. You know. What if I just answered like that, like Bruce Willis in The Fifth Element, like, no. So I really like Joe's work. I think he's a fantastic artist, and that word encompasses everything. And first conscious exposure, it's weird because it would have probably, I talked with him earlier about Horns, and Horns was more or less my first exposure to his work, and also something that my wife and I bonded over. And it helped kind of like, you know, we talked it out over our first sort of dates and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a cool thing. Not to get all mushy, but
dude, it's spooky season, all right? Like that's way too
fine.
romantic.
Okay, so I don't know. I picked up a hitchhiker on the side of the road, and he had a hook for a hand, and my wife and I met, and the guy was like, "Hey, do you like Joe Hill?" And I said, "I guess I do, Mister. Don't kill us." And he's like, "That's cool," and then he just left. So is that good? Are you not entertained? Is that good?
Perfect.
Thank
That's
you.
exactly
All
the story I wanted
Gosh.
for spooky
Okay.
season.
Okay.
All right. For those of you unfamiliar with the name or could just use like a refresher on his long list of accolades, here it is. Joe Hill has been dubbed a #1 New York Times bestseller so many times that at this point, he might as well just change his birth certificate to include that as a middle name. I don't know if that's legal or not, but he's got the accolades for
It's
it.
legal. It's legal.
He's the author of novels such as Heart-Shaped Box, The Fireman, and Full Throttle. Much of his work has been adapted into TV and film, like his second novel, Horns, which was translated into film in 2014 and stars Daniel Radcliffe. And the Hollywood connection doesn't stop there, because in 2021, his short story, The Black Phone, was also adapted into a movie and stars Ethan Hawke.
Good flick.
And if long-form and short-form prose wasn't enough of a challenge and accomplishment already, he moved into the realm of comic books in 2007 and co-created the long-running comic book series Locke Key with artistic maestro Gabriel Rodriguez, which netted him his first Eisner Award for Best Writer in 2011. Since then, he's been embraced so well by the comic community that in 2019, DC Comics just gave him his own imprint. All right, they was like, this is a great idea. Let's give him his own imprint.
Is that how it went?
I'm pretty sure. We'll ask him to clarify that. But it's called Hill House Comics, where he curates his own cutting-edge line of horror comics with some of the biggest names in horror storytelling. And we're going to talk to Joe about all of this. So, without further ado, Shortbox Nation, let's welcome, for the first time ever, Joe Hill to the show. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Guys, thanks so much for having me on.
It's our pleasure, man.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing to hop on.
I like the idea that I have a whole street team of dudes with like hooks for hands. We're just out there roaming the highways of America, trying to push my fiction on anyone who will pick them up. That is the way to sell books.
Joe, they got stickers like Black Flag logos, buddy, all over the place.
Yeah. I don't have that, but I need that.
Joe, you're situated in New England, right?
Yeah, I live in the seacoast area of New Hampshire. I'm a New England guy. I've been up here pretty much my whole life.
Okay.
Yeah.
For someone that has never been to New Hampshire or New England, could you describe it in just a few words? Like, what is New Hampshire and New England like?
You know, it's very densely forested, pine trees, mountains, old rotting covered bridges. Families like the crew from Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Quaint.
It's a terrific part of the country. I have 18-month-old twins. I'm raising them here. And,
oh, wow.
And it's the part of New Hampshire I live in. If you throw a stick, it'll hit one writer and bounce off and hit another. Dan Brown lives around.
Oh, wow.
Here,
Okay.
Da Vinci Code. Jodi Picoult lives around here. John Irving moved out just before I moved in, probably because he heard I was coming.
That's funny.
The guy who wrote a separate piece, whose name I'm blanking on, Knowles is his last name. So it's a very literary part of the world. A lot of great independent bookstores, a lot of terrific independent comic stores. Jetpack Comics up in Rochester is an unbelievable comic book superstore. a lot of comic book writers and artists. And so I feel really lucky to be here.
That's cool, man.
Do you have time? I'm kind of guessing the answer is no, considering you have an 18-month-old.
I'll say, hey, man, my 18-month-old's at home, buddy, okay?
Do you have time to go to the comic shop? When's the last time you've been to a shop?
Oh, boy. Well, we're getting right to the difficult questions, aren't we? When was the last time I walked into a comic shop? Boy, oh, boy. Probably the last time I walked into a comic shop was Forbidden Planet in London in the summer. And I swept through and I bought a bunch of graphic novels while I was there and a couple board games.
Nice.
Botter, you're wearing a Forbidden Planet shirt, but it's Forbidden Planet New York, which used to be part of the same chain, but because I know I've been going to Forbidden Planet since I was a kid. So I happen to randomly know that they split apart. And now they're two separate organizations. So, for comic book geeks, Forbidden Planet London is like the center of the world.
Wow.
They've got everything, and great staff and amazing figures and T-shirts and about 1 million comic books, and I could stay there all day. Actually, it's one of these places where it's hard to shop because you get overwhelmed by choice. There's too much to get, so you almost don't know how to get anything.
I had the same feeling. I went to Mile High Comics for the first time in Denver a month
Great
or two
place.
ago, and same thing. I didn't know what to buy. I was like, this is kind of more like a museum. I don't want to touch anything. I just want to soak it in and take it in. Do you recall what trades you had bought? What's the last couple of comics you bought?
I picked up. I want to say I picked up Scott Snyder Horror Run because I just read it, but actually I think it was Night of the Ghoul. But actually I think that was a Comixology original, so I don't think I bought that one as a graphic. It was a really great post-apocalyptic graphic novel that I remember picking up, Kali, with just amazing. I think the artist is Robert Samlin. Extraordinary art, just absolutely mind-blowing. I probably picked up the Zoe Thorogood.
Lonely at the Center of the Planet?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say I haven't read it yet, but I did read her brilliant adaptation of Rain, which is based on one of my stories, which she did with David Bohr.
Nicely done.
She went out to San Diego. She went out to San Diego this summer as nominated for something like 6 or 7 Eisner Awards.
Yeah, she was nominated for 5, and I think she won Best Promising New Comic Artist or something of that regard.
Yeah, she's super young, though, and I think people can expect to see her, she's going to have to clear some space on her shelf because, over the next few years, she's going to collect a lot of Eisners.
I love this conversation because it sounds to any outsider like we're sportscasters, but for the nerdiest stuff ever.
Yeah,
we sound,
right.
She's got a big future ahead of her. 2 points on the board right now.
Chuck, I really see a future for her.
2 Eisners ago, we were thinking the same thing, and I feel like 10 Eisners later, we'll still be thinking she's outstanding. Botter, back to you.
That's good.
I love it.
Joe, I like to usually kick off these interviews by figuring out your origin story when it comes to comics. And I asked this during our lit chat, but for the listeners that don't live in Jax or weren't there, what was your first conscious exposure to comic books? Do you remember that comic that made you a fan of the medium?
Yes, I remember all of it.
Wow.
So the first book that I ever read that was not like a Dick and Jane book, was Bring on the Bad Guys, which was a graphic trade collecting the best origin stories of the villains, that Stan Lee had come up with his collaborators, Dicto and Kirby and all the rest of them. And, to this day, Bring on the Bad Guys is still one of my all-time favorite graphic novels. I mean, I've read the covers off that. I've had 2 or 3 copies and just read the covers right off them.
It's funny. I was going to bring that up because I'd seen in an interview in the past that you had mentioned that book, and I was like, Bonner and I were just talking about these books, because it's like
Origins.
You had Stan Lee
and Bring on the Bad Guy.
Yeah, you had Stan Lee in your bedroom with you, hey, true believer, you want to know about Dread Dormammu? We'll turn the page, and you're like, oh yeah, I do want to know about this guy. What's up with this dude? He's freaking got, and it's like.
Those covers are beautiful, too.
They're so good,
the
man.
Painted covers, yeah.
So I wanted to ask, because this dovetails right into it, do you still keep an eye out for stuff like that, or have you already bought these things 5 times over in your life?
Well, so my brother and I are both, comic books was something we shared. Our comic collection was something, that we both tended and, had lots of, that was the thing that we talked about the most when we were kids. Well, it was good then. It's not so good now because the thing is we have 15 long boxes of comics that are sitting in storage and we can't agree. We can't divide the collection because we can't agree who bought what.
Oh, wow.
And so neither of us can have it. So the collection now exists out of reach to both of us.
That's funny.
Because once he starts making moves like, I'm going to help myself to this, then I'm like, that's fine. I'm going to take these. And it gets ugly real fast.
This is like the Hatfield McCoys over here.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see it's a universal problem, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
For siblings. I'm glad to hear this is a universal problem.
Yeah, my message to little kids is love your siblings, but don't share your comic book collection with them. Because later it's going to be grief. It's going to be a source of constant tension. Don't do it.
I think we got the soundbite to promote this episode.
Yeah. The other thing, sort of early experience with comics was, do you remember the comics that came with little floppy vinyl records in them?
Yes. They were put out by Power Records. I've got a few of them, like Spider-Man.
So there was
and all that.
There was a Spider-Man record and comic that you'd listen to the record and you'd flip the pages of the comic. And I remember he fights Draco the Dragon. And I remember, that was like crap your pants scary to me when I was about, when I was really young, 6. When I was like 6, I'd listen to like those like cultists chanting Draco.
Yeah, it's unsettling.
The dragon sort of materialized out of the stars and Spider-Man's fighting him and he's like, no one likes a bragging dragon. And I just about remember the whole record, Recently, Chris Ryle, who is, one of the great guys in the comic business, he's, for a long time was sort of the creative editor-in-chief at IDW Comics. He's got his own imprint at Image. Yep, that's right. And Chris was actually the best man at my wedding. I think for my last birthday, Chris tracked down all those records, the Hulk, Spider-Man, from the very late 70s and sent me a whole bunch of them. So I sort of somewhere over on the vinyl shelf, I think I've got them.
That's a good friend right there.
Yeah, it sure is.
Damn, I wish I had one of those.
Joe, cool story, dude.
Chris was the editor on every issue of Locke Key. Of course, Gabriel Rodriguez has been the artist on every one. Chris was my best man at my wedding, and Gabe designed my wedding ring.
Wow.
Yeah, my wife's wedding ring, too.
How did that happen?
I asked.
Yeah.
I asked. Because the thing is, so for those who've never read it, Locke and Key is a long-running comic. I think we're up to almost 50 issues now, which actually isn't that long, but it's been spread over almost 20 years now. So we just had our 15th anniversary. So Locke and Key is set in the town of Lovecraft, Massachusetts, and it's about a house that's 2 centuries old, Key House. And Key House is filled with impossible doors and magic keys. Every key opens a different door and activates a different supernatural power. In the way of these kinds of stories, there's one key that should never be used, that of course is. There's a villain named Dodge who wants to collect all the keys and wants to have the power for herself. And Gabe designed every intricate key and lock that appears in the comic. And many of those keys have since been reproduced as sort of collectibles by a main collectible company called Skeleton Crew. And I knew after seeing dozens of Gabe's ornate, beautifully designed and engineered keys that he would be the guy, to do a really beautiful wedding ring. And he did.
Wow. That is so beautiful.
That's really cool.
Talk about some friendship. Joey, you've gone on to, I think you described... Yeah, I'm trying to recall what phrase you used when we chatted for the Lit Chat, but I think you described working in comics as the closest thing to being in a band like the Rolling Stones. And I was curious, do you prefer that team aspect of working in comics, or do you like that solo writer when it comes to writing novels and such? Yo, this is Botter. Sorry for interrupting this episode, but I'll keep it brief. I wanted to let you know about a massive sale we have going on over at the Shortbox store on all of our merchandise and apparel. That's theshortboxstore.bigcartel.com. You can now save 20% off your entire order using the discount code YOO, Y-O-O. So if you've been waiting for the right time to finally buy that gauntlet snapback, or if you ever wanted to buy any of the shirts you see me wear on the podcast, well, now's your chance to get them for a steal. We still have a few sizes left of everything, but they won't last long, and once they're gone, they are gone. And then I mentioned that all of our apparel is screen printed on high quality material. None of that heat transfer or direct to garment stuff. Our shirts are some of the most comfortable ones you'll ever wear, and the hats look even better in person. So wear your support for the Shortbox Nation proudly, knowing that you're going to look damn good doing it. Get to theshortboxstore.bigcartel.com as soon as you can, and don't forget to use that discount code YOO, Y-O-O, to save 20% off your entire order. All of this information can be found in this episode's show notes if you want to get there faster. Thanks for not pressing fast forward. Now back to the show.
No, I like the team thing. I mean, I have a friend, Josh Friedman, who wrote. He was the showrunner on Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, and he's a terrific screenwriter. He did a lot. I think he co-wrote the latest Avatar movie, and Josh is a great guy. But I remember him saying that screenwriters are writers who hate being alone even more than they hate writing. And I always love that quote, and I think there's a little bit of that in people who love writing and comics. Writing is a very lonely business. Writing novels and short stories, you spend a lot of time alone in an office with the door shut, just listening to the voices in your head. It's amazing you get paid for that instead of medicated and put in a, that you spend so much time conversing with imaginary people and actually be rewarded for it. But for me, working in comics, I have sometimes said it's, I can't play an instrument to save my life, but when I work in comics, I can almost feel like what it might be like to be in a successful touring outfit, to be in the Rolling Stones, to be in My Chemical Romance or something, because I write the scripts, and when I write the scripts, I'm thinking to myself, what do I really want to see Gabe draw? What would be a fun, what's a storyline that will really, lead Gabe to draw something that's going to blow my mind? And, so I write the script thinking about what Gabe can do with it. And then Gabe turns around and starts drawing pages, which are even better than whatever my wildest dreams were, even, on a whole nother level than whatever I was imagining. And then Jay Photos brings in the colors. And I've said before that I think that Jay in some ways is the most ignored part of a really important team, because he's not really just coloring the page. He's actually like a lighter on a film set, lighting the scene. There's a real sense of the way he's bringing, he's not coloring the page, he's lighting the page. And he does things with sunlight. I remember in the second issue of Locke Key, he did a thing with the haze of sunlight coming through a barred window. And even though you couldn't see out the window, you could feel that it was early fall in New England from the quality of that light, and so we all, everyone in the team does something that excites everyone else. And then we start playing off each other and building up, you have this experience of the story getting built up to something, that was more exciting than whatever you thought it could be when you were going in. And that's, to me, that must be what it's like to play live in front of an audience, or to, go into, a studio and record a Beggar's Banquet or something, because you're feeding off each other's energy and creativity and bringing out the best in each other. And it's so much not like work that you could do it all day. I remember feeling like, especially in the early issues of Locke and Key, almost resenting ordinary life when it began to leak in, when I began to be called out to do other stuff, because I just wanted to write the comic. I could have written the comic all day long.
Yeah, now all I'm imagining is you with like dyed black hair and eyeliner just typing away.
And
like,
My Chemical Romance,
when I
right?
was a young man.
I've always tried to keep. I'm super goth, but I've always tried to keep it inside. It's kind of the inner. It's kind of my inner goth.
You're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm wearing the flannel shirt right now, but in my mind, I'm actually, I don't know, wearing like an Edgar Allan Poe, I can't remember what the name of the frilly tie is, but like that tie and stuff.
He's got like the Joy Division tattoo on his chest,
Yeah.
like ah.
I was thinking that Edgar Allan Poe he was one of the earliest popular horror writers, and is also probably the last horror writer to make an important fashion statement. Because he just looked the part. He just looked good.
I mean,
Yeah, he set the template.
look, if you've been to Baltimore, I mean, he was in a rough neighborhood.
You know about the guy who's turned up for like over 100 years now in the cape and the mask to leave roses on Poe's grave.
What?
On the anniversary of Poe's death. So for over a century, on the night of Edgar Allan Poe's death, a man in a mask, a cape, and a sort of dramatic black hat swoops in from the dark, leaves roses on his grave, and then swoops away. And obviously it's been going on for a century, so obviously it's not the same guy. The story is that it was one guy for nearly 50 years, and then it was his son, and that since then there's been a third guy who has stepped in, and that there's about 12 people who know who it is, who have enabled both the entrances and the escapes. Because TV crews would love to get the guy's face, and they've never succeeded. And I think that the cemetery and the people who run the cemetery have also done some stuff to help protect, his secret identity. But that guy is like the closest thing we have in the world to a superhero. A masked crusader who honors the life and death of Edgar Allan Poe.
He's the ghost who walks. He's the Phantom. If it's passed down generationally, it's basically Lee Falk's the Phantom.
Isn't it wild that it's more than one guy? That it was one guy and then he passed it on to someone else and no one has ever identified them?
Imagine that training manual. All right, so there's wait, damn it. So here's escape route A. You want to usually take escape route B on Tuesdays.
It's your first day at work.
Right.
You're like, look, man, I've never done this before. You'll be fine, kid. Listen, take your smoke break at around 9:30, but don't push it.
Every third year we use the sewer.
Yeah.
Every third year we use the sewer escape.
That's great.
Hope you brought your galoshes, kid.
I can already tell the rabbit holes and tangents we're going down in this episode.
We're having fun.
All right, Joe, back to like origins and
right,
just starting
right.
out. I was able to find, I think, what might be your first comic credit. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was 2005 issue of Spider-Man Unlimited, issue 8, with Joshua Ortega on art duties. Do you remember that at all?
The artist, Joshua Ortega, wrote the backup feature. I wrote the first story. Josh's story is actually, his backup feature is actually quite a bit better than mine. The artist was Seth Fisher.
Okay.
Seth Fisher.
Yeah. So there's quite a bit of story here, and I'll try to sort of pack it into, the Reader's Digest version. At the time I got the gig to write Spider-Man Unlimited, I was a failed novelist. I had written 4 novels that I couldn't sell to save my life. I spent 3 years writing one, this big epic fantasy novel that was sort of like a George R.R. Martin thing. That book was turned down by every publisher in New York City, every publisher in London, and then for a final kick in the crotch, it was turned down by some publishers in Canada, which I always say is like, no matter how low you've gone, there's always further to fall, And I had actually mostly given up on the idea that I was, that I had a novel in me. I thought, I've spent years at this and I've taken my best swing. I couldn't sell a book, and maybe I'm not a novelist. Maybe I can't do it. And that's okay. A lot of people aren't novelists, what I had done is I had started to write short stories, and some of the short stories were pretty good. Some of the short stories won awards. One of them got in a best of collection, a best of the year. And it was a ghost story called 20th Century Ghost, that was in a year's best horror. And at the time this was also like pre-modern internet. There wasn't internet. There was like AOL and stuff, but it was like, there was no Google. or anything, but I bought a lot of magazines, like Writer's Digest and stuff, looking for opportunities. And somewhere, I don't know where, I came across the information that Marvel Comics had 2 secret tryout titles. One was X-Men Unlimited, and one was Spider-Man Unlimited. And they were bringing in new writers, poets, short story writers, playwrights, to see what they could do in the comic book form. And I wanted that gig. I wanted that gig so bad. And so there was a woman named Teresa Fockerisle, who was sort of their talent scout. And I sent her a copy of 20th Century Ghost in the best of collection and wrote a letter and said, I'd love to take a swing. And she gave me a shot at Spider-Man. The second or third draft of my script wasn't bad. It was okay. But I choked because I was so excited. It was such a big opportunity after having written those failed novels to finally get a shot at writing Spider-Man, who is my favorite superhero and who I'd loved since I listened to the Draco the Dragon record at like 6. It was everything to me. And with every editorial pass, my story became more generic and less fun until it finally became this almost completely forgettable 12-page Spider-Man story that was saved, that did turn out really well, but not because of me. It turned out really well because the artist assigned to the story was Seth Fisher, a young, impossibly skillful talent, and Seth drew the hell out of it and made all my unfunny jokes really funny. And he made every sequence work, and it became this incredibly fun thing to read. We also had an iconic cover, which has since been used again and again and again to sell Spider-Man. And I'm embarrassed to admit I can't remember who did the cover, but of all the Spider-Man Unlimited covers, we got the one that was absolutely iconic. So you're going to say something about the cover.
Yes, because I am such a Capcom nerd. It is the cover is by a famous Capcom artist by the name of Shinkiru, who did a lot of like Street Fighter and just a lot of just Capcom artwork. It is by far one of my favorite Spider-Man covers ever. Because I'm a big fan of anytime like manga and like video game artists do their take on like classic American superheroes. So this cover, like to your point, listeners, do yourself a favor. If you type in Spider-Man Unlimited number 8, you're going to take a look at it. And you're going to be like, oh my God, I've seen that on XYZ things.
Yes, so many times. It's been reused so many times. And, and that was on our comic. And Seth inspired me. He started using connections to get me more gigs. He's an unbelievable guy. We were working on another comic together at the time of his death. He died in Japan. He fell off a building at an incredibly young age, leaving behind his wife and infant son. And it was just an absolute stomach punch. The world really lost, comics really lost a one-of-a-kind talent and a remarkable guy.
Yeah, his work is freaking fantastic. He did God, in my opinion, he draws the best Mr. Freeze outside of Bruce Timm.
Yeah, he did a Fantastic Four series. It was great. He did a terrific Batman series, wonderful Batman series.
He kind of reminds me of a little bit of Mobius. His line work is
very like Mobius.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And that's high praise. Anybody who's listened to the show knows we really dig Jean Girard,
Yeah, and so does Gabriel Rodriguez. Just randomly, it's interesting because but I probably a lot. Now that I think about it, I think he's Mobius is kind of the artist that a lot of comic book artists would wish that they were. To look up to as a source of inspiration. And but anyway, so Spider-Man, right? So that's where I broke in, and I was a comic book writer before I was a novelist. I was, it turned out eventually I did have a few novels in me. That's a whole other story. But by the time my first novel was finally published in 2007, I was already well at work on Locke and Key, and I had done 2 other comics, even though they hadn't come out yet. And, and for years and years, I did think of myself as a comic book writer who writes novels, not a novelist who writes comic books.
That's inspiring, dude.
And really quick, I want to take it because I've got a follow-up question comic book wise, but I want to take a quick detour because you brought up your first novel being Heart-Shaped Box, which is one that I am currently 120 pages in currently for the first time reading it. And it was a book that my man Cesar here recommended, when I was telling him about, hey, Joe Hill's going to be here in town, the lit chat, what should I read? What would I like? And he was like, dude, you would love Heart-Shaped Box. And I do. I'm actually thinking about like reading it tonight. I'm like looking forward to reading it. It got me thinking. This is a weird question, so stick with me here. It got me thinking. For anyone that hasn't read this book, the very high level gist of it is a retired rock star ends up buying a haunted suit, and it causes havoc on his life. It got me thinking about like the haunted shit that I've come across, and I firmly believe Cesar will know this. I've got a fish tank that I firmly believe is fucking haunted. I've had it for years. I don't know why I throw it out. Every fish that lives in it has died.
Dude, seriously.
I don't know. There's something haunted about this fucking fish tank, and it's taken many a goldfish that I've grown fond of.
Yeah.
When you think about like your interactions with like the supernatural or macabre, what's been like the closest encounter you've had with that? Do you have like a story like that?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, wow.
But first, do you guys both believe in ghosts?
Ooh.
I don't know.
Same.
I'm of I believe
agnostic on the subject.
I believe whatever Richard Matheson tells me and what dreams may come.
So you're doubtful about ghosts.
Skeptical, I would say, but I'm not
you'd be
against.
Completely at ease if you had to spend a night sleeping nailed into a coffin in a house where people had been murdered. You'd be fine with that because there's no such thing as ghosts.
So everyone's been killed somewhere. So
right, so it'd be fine.
Yeah, I think I would be. I just wouldn't like to. I'm claustrophobic, but I don't know if I'm a.
So just listeners should know this is Cesar is ready to spend the night in a coffin in a house. This is your opportunity. Leave comments in the podcast recommending houses where he can spend the night. Because he doesn't believe in ghosts and he has no reason to be worried. It's going to be fine.
I love
He's
it.
ready to do it as a community service.
Well, really quick, there's a house down the street I could recommend you.
This is the best part because I'm like sitting here. I'm such a grimy dude and I love making fun of people. And I'm sitting here like, should I hold back? Because I don't really know Joe like that. I can't just be talking to him like that. And I was like, oh, game on, Joe. Game on. You good. We're good, buddy.
Welcome to the family.
Yeah, seriously.
So Locke Key was filmed as a pilot for TV on several occasions. And eventually, on the third time's the charm, it was made into a TV series that lasted 3 seasons on Netflix. But prior to that, there was a pilot filmed for Hulu, directed by Andy Muschietti, who directed It Chapter 1. That unaired pilot is extraordinary, brilliant, and terrifying. And it still bewilders me that we didn't get it on screen. It's an absolute, the energy, both the heart and the terror that was embodied in It Chapter 1. Andy carried that right into his pilot for Hulu, listeners are welcome to start their, release the Snyder Cut petition to get Hulu, to throw a couple bucks at the pilot. And actually probably Netflix would have to air it now because I think Netflix, the rights situation might be messed up. But I wish people could see how beautiful and how scary that first pilot was. But before Andy and Barbara made their unaired pilot, Josh Friedman, who I was talking about earlier, made a pilot in Pittsburgh in the winter, directed by Mark Romanek. That would have been about 2010 for Fox. And at the time I thought, wow, we're going to have a TV show on Fox. This is amazing. And Gabe and Chris and myself converged on Pittsburgh in the winter. I'm getting to the ghost story. There is a ghost story here.
Take your time, Joe.
So we converged on Pittsburgh in the winter, which is where everyone found out that Pittsburgh in the winter is a terrible place to make a TV show. And the biggest reason the show never got on the air was because there was a blizzard that wiped out 30% of the filming.
Oh, wow.
So they had to staple the pilot together, having only 70% of the script shot. And actually, they did a really good job, but it didn't get on the air. There was a slot for one new show, and it wound up being Alcatraz instead of us. So, J.J. Abrams is a brilliant filmmaker and TV show creator, terrific storyteller, one-of-a-kind talent. But his show got on the air and my show didn't, so he can get fucked. And I've met him. He was so kind. He was so kind to me. I actually met him on the set of one of the Star Wars films. He let me sit in the Millennium Falcon. And I feel bad about saying that he can get fucked, but Alcatraz beat out Locke Key, and so he can, and that there's nothing I can do with that. It's just a fact. But so the best part of the Pittsburgh shooting was spending the night in the bar with Gabriel Rodriguez and Chris Ryle and talking about the comic, which at the time was very much ongoing. So for listeners who haven't read it, the whole story, beginning, middle, and an end, Locke and Key is a contained story with a beginning, middle, and an end that took place over 6 books. Since then, there's been more Locke and Key, but if you just wanted to read those 6 books, you would have a completely enclosed, satisfying experience, and you would not feel like, oh, they left a bunch of stuff unresolved. There's full resolution to all the major plot threads, and you get a complete story, like a novel, But we had not finished the series or were even close to it in 2010 when the pilot was shot for Fox. And sitting in the bar, we figured out how to end the series. Actually, Gabe figured out how to end the series, only he thought it was silly, so he presented the idea as a joke. And as soon as I heard it, I said, "That's the end. That's how we're going to end it." And we did. So I can't talk about his solution without spoilers, so I'm not going to do that. Just that there was a remarkable twist that he threw out there as a joke that I instantly knew solved a number of narrative problems. So, and that serves as a reminder that Locke and Key has always been. It was never my story and Gabe drew the pictures. It's always been our story. Where we solved problems together. We figured out those people together. I learned as much about the characters from the way Gabe drew them as he ever learned from the way I wrote them, But so anyway, so I was in Pittsburgh and we saw him film for a few days. And then I decided to drive home to New Hampshire in a rent-a-car. And I started driving. I thought I was going to drive back to New Hampshire in a day. I drove all day and I was still in fucking Pennsylvania. I couldn't believe it. It was like Pennsylvania never ended. I'm like, how big is this state? And so it was closing in on getting dark. And I started thinking I'm going to have to find a hotel. I did a little looking online and I heard about a hotel in Bethlehem outside of Philadelphia. This hotel was a 19th century hotel, beautifully restored, in a 19th century part of town with cobblestone streets and brick sidewalks and, gas lanterns, gas lamps, but they offered a room with a boo. So the room with the boo was their most haunted hotel room, and you could have it for a special price. And I remember calling up my parents and talking to my parents, and I'm like, so what happens if I get the room with the boo and then they find me the next morning dead in my bed and my hair is turned completely white from terror?
You did not.
Do you think if that happens, they'll still run my credit card? I mean, I did get what I paid for, but so I called up to book the room with the boo, and they said it's already booked. We have a honeymooning couple up there, and they're very in love, but they're also kind of goth, and they wanted the haunted room for their honeymoon suite. So we can't give it to you, but good news, we can give you the room right under their room, and that one is also haunted. And I'm thinking, yeah, sure it is. Okay, give me the room right under theirs. That's fine. I'm thinking like, yeah, sure. As long as I'm paying, they're willing to give me a haunted room. Every room in the hotel is haunted, whatever. So I got this room and I had a terrific dinner, and I could look out the window. There was some snow falling and I could see a gas lantern, and it was like looking back to the era of Edgar Allan Poe. It's just, it was like time travel. And I went to bed and I woke up at 1 a.m. and there was a woman standing at the foot of my bed staring at me, and I couldn't see her. I just knew she was there, and I couldn't move my body, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Get away! Get away!" And the honeymooning couple in the room above me went, "Ah!" and fell out of their bed, crashed out of their bed, because they could hear me screaming through the floor. The rigidity of my body loosened up. The sleep paralysis left me. I sat up. There was no one in the room. I turned on the lights. There's no one there. And of course, there is a thing that can happen to you. It's hypnagogic terror, where you wake up, but you're still sort of almost hallucinating because you're still in a dream state and your body is frozen the way it is when you're asleep.
It's happened to me.
Terrible, terribly frightening.
Yeah.
There was no ghost, I don't think. I'm not sure, but the people in the room above me absolutely got their money's worth. Woken at 1 a.m. by a shriek from hell that they could not explain. They got their money's worth.
The funny thing is, I was like, get away. And it's like, you hear their version. Yeah, we heard, get away.
Oh, yeah. It was not a manly. This was not a manly sort of command.
You stop it. You get away from me.
I was like, get away. It was pretty. I was several octaves up from my normal tone.
Look, Joe, I ain't mad at you, man. I had an experience. It was my sleep paralysis demon it looked like a ginormous what's the ghost Pokemon?
A Haunter, Ghastly, Gengar.
It was Gengar. It was Gengar. A huge weird dark looming form with cat ears, but it had a Michael Jackson mask, like one of those fake sort of styrene-ish plastic 60s Halloween mask with the thin string.
Yeah.
And it was like Michael Jackson's face, and it was like late 90s Michael Jackson. I'll just leave that there. And and I was just like, I can't move. I can't move. It's just looking at me, and I'm like,
I don't think I've ever heard you tell this story.
It sucks, dude. It sucks so bad.
All those cheap plastic masks from the 80s are actually so much more frightening than the more realistic full head rubber, sculpted. I don't know why. It's the uncanny valley, right? Isn't it the uncanny valley where you're looking at that face and you're thinking,
that's not real.
That's not right.
Yeah, that's not right.
And it would be bad to wake up at 1 a.m. and see someone in the hog head mask standing outside your window.
Oh my God.
That would be bad.
Oh my God.
But it would be worse to look out the window and just see someone in a clear plastic 80s mask
just hi.
Not good. Not good.
And I'm sitting over here the only time my body ever gets rigid and fraught with fear is anytime I open up my electricity bill during the summer. I'm
stupid.
like, get away from me.
You want to know what was a great horror mask was, and maybe this is a good conversation for Halloween. I think maybe one of the best was, I'm going to discount the mask in Black Phone because I'm personally attached. So it's not fair to talk about that. Is a great mask.
You're freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty badass.
It was Tom Savini had a hand in the design.
Did he?
And Jason Baker, I believe is his name. I'm so embarrassed if I got his first name wrong, but it's Jason Baker also did a bunch of the design. And I knew the moment I saw the mask that there was a chance that we were going to have a really special film, that it was going to be really scary. But so putting aside the Black Phone, because I'm obviously biased there, I think maybe one of the best masks in horror in the last 15, 20 years is the dude in Hush. Have you seen Mike Flanagan's Hush?
Of course.
He doesn't actually wear the mask for much of the film. He actually only wears the mask for about the first half hour.
Right.
That was a creepy fucking mask.
Yeah, it's so funny because my wife and I, we love Mike Flanagan, and we love that he has the same team that he works with as far as actors and creators
sort
are
of,
concerned.
it's like what is that when a director has the same cast over and over again? They call that a company. Right? It's the Mike Flanagan company. Yeah, like a theater troupe.
They're like a theater. Yep, you beat me to it. Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny seeing Katie Siegel and Samantha Sloan talking about Midnight Mass before it's even out.
Before Midnight Mass was
a thing. And then to see it's like, oh my gosh, that's Katie Siegel just chilling out, being stalked by this freaking creep in this scary ass mask. It's such a good, if you guys have not seen this film, it's freaking fantastic. 'Tis the season, and it's
that's a good one. That's a good one, and while a lot of people have seen it, I also feel like it's flown a little under the radar. Certainly, I think that so we're 23 years into the new century, and I think this has been a great century for horror.
Hell
It
yeah.
has been, the last 23 years has been one. Blumhouse has a lot to. We can thank Blumhouse for a lot of that.
A24.
But A24. There's been a lot of, but there's been great horror comics. There's been great horror novels. It's just been an unbelievably fertile time for the genre. So it's hard to point at anyone and say, and that person is one of the cornerstones of why it's been so great. But I definitely think Mike Flanagan is one of the cornerstones of why the genre has been so exciting, so vibrant in the last quarter century. Because he's just made, his shows and his movies have so much heart and intelligence. And they're so fucking scary, which is important. But also he also just makes films in an interesting way. He did things with sound in Hush that were, astonishing and fresh, and really exciting. And he brings something special to every film and every show. I've never been disappointed by a Mike Flanagan anything.
So my mom is very she is sort of like in denial about being a horror fanatic. She'll be like, my mom and I are both like born and raised in Puerto Rico, and she's got a real thick accent. And I'll suggest a movie for her or a book for her or anything, and she'll be like, I don't know. Does it have a lot of cussing in it? Is it got and it's like, why are you being coy? Like, I know for a fact when I'm not around, you still consume this stuff, even if this, it's not edited, quote unquote, for television, right? So I was like, I showed her the trailer for Black Phone. I said, hey, check this out. Because she was talking to, because she's watching my baby at home. She's like, who are you going to talk to today? I said, well, Mom, here's some of his work. Here, I have some of his books on my shelf. And I told her a little about you. And she's like, oh, that's so nice, honey. And I said, check out this movie. I think you dig it, Mom. So she saw the preview and she was kind of like, Oi, hey, Santo, what? Oh my God, with that mask. Just like that. And it's funny because anybody on the outside would be like, she's turned off. She's probably going to say something judgmental and be like, I would never watch that sort of thing. I know her and I'm just like, my work here is done. Like, because she's going to go right home and look on her little iPad. And my dad's going to lumber out of it, the room like, Anna, what are you doing? What's going on? She'll be like, shh. I'm watching this movie. Don't talk to me.
My wife is not a horror film fan. She doesn't like to be scared. She'll do roller coasters. I don't like roller coasters.
I'm there with you, man. I'll hold the purse. I'll do whatever you want me to do, but I'm not going on that thing.
I actually have gotten a little bit better about them, and I've learned a secret about roller coasters. But and she's willing to do like haunted houses with me now. If we get to an attraction and there's like a haunted house or something, she'll usually can be persuaded to go in with me. So we're sort of good about nudging the person to try something. But like we don't push each other too far.
Sure.
But she doesn't usually watch the horror films with me, and we do have an arrangement where I watch one horror film every week. So there's one night a week when that's like horror movie night, and and she's like, "That's cool. I've got some reading to do. You enjoy it." Every once in a while, she'll watch the film with me, but it has to be, like a movie from the 1930s is really safe. Like a black and white. Like when I'm digging out some real like old classic or something,
before
James Whale or whatever.
Right. This is Carl Laemmle's Dracula.
Yeah, one of these movies where it's like, oh no, here comes the mummy. We all better walk a little faster.
Yeah. It's like, oh, okay, cool. It's like, Boris Karloff's like introducing the movie hasn't even started yet. It's like, I can't look. I can't.
I want to take us back to comics really quick. We've talked about your origin. We've thrown out the names of a lot of, Marvel heavy, right? The Power Records, right. Your first Spider-Man issue. Let's fast forward by a lot, I'm assuming. How did you end up working with DC and how did they give you an imprint? Like, what was the inception of Hill House Comics?
So I did a little growing after the days when I loved Draco the Dragon fighting Spider-Man on my little vinyl record.
Good for you.
As a teenager, I had the good fortune to sort of come of age during the Great British Invasion of comics. So we're talking about, Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, Jamie Delano, Grant Morrison. And the thing about the British Invasion, a lot of them wrote for what would later become Vertigo. So they were working for DC, but they were writing a kind of comic book that was not like DC's usual bag. And they were doing stuff that was more literary, more sophisticated, with characters represented that we weren't used to seeing represented in comics. And it was very graphic and very scary. A lot of that stuff was, so Sandman and Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing were comics that changed everything. It was, the comics that really changed everyone's ideas about what a comic book could do were Sandman, Alan Moore's legendary run on Swamp Thing, Watchmen, of course, Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, and what they had in common was they all pushed the envelope. So they were much more adult. Alan Moore, was the first person to say anyone who spends every night climbing into a rubber fetish outfit to get punched is actually gratifying some urges that are kind of disturbing, certainly go beyond just your strong feelings about right and wrong. And, stuff like that was so fresh, and so exciting. And, and I loved it. I just wallowed in it. I just was completely, those were the comics that shaped my ideas about how to write comics. I sometimes say, Gabe and I figured out knew how to write Locke Key because we both loved Sandman. And after, and I realized that we could use the keys the way Neil Gaiman used dreams, that I could use that element to tell any story. I could do a comedy, I could do a horror story, I could do a tragedy, that those keys, no pun intended, unlocked an almost limitless range of story potentials. So Locke and Key was like a Vertigo title, but it was published by IDW, not DC. I was always kind of a good match for DC's darker sort of storytelling. And I had begun to talk to an editor there named Mark Doyle, 6-7 years before Hill House happened. 7 years before Hill House happened, Mark and I began to talk about how I could do a story for them. And at the time I was going to do, and eventually what I wound up pitching them on was Basket Full of Heads, which was a story that I had written the first script for in 2007. And when I wrote it in 2007, I was like, I haven't figured out how to tell this story yet. There's a good plot here. There's a good character, but I don't really know what I'm doing. Fast forward 13 years and I figured out how to crack the story. And I said, I'd love to do this. And Mark said, what if we did even more? What if Basket Full of Heads was just one title in a whole range of titles that you would sort of curate? And I got very excited about that idea, especially since Vertigo was going away. Initially, I think Vertigo thrived because it was telling adult scary stories. And then it began to drift into telling other kinds of stories, which I also thought were really great, that were artistic and pushing the envelope of what was possible in comics, and just like where they started. But they didn't sell very well. And there's something about commerce there that I think is interesting. I believe that the kind of stories comics tell best are horror stories, and the numbers prove it. So in the 1950s, the biggest selling comics were not Superman or Captain America. The biggest selling comics were Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror. The horror comics wildly outsold the superhero comics, and they were graphic and gory and silly and pretty stupid, and they upset parents. And so in the late 50s, they held a series of congressional hearings on juvenile delinquency. A crackpot psychiatrist named Frederick Wortham.
Dr. Frederick Wortham. Oh, boy.
Dr. Frederick Wortham basically came out and and used his junk science to claim that Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and the horror comics were perverting kids and causing juvenile delinquency. It sent a shockwave through the industry. It led to a lot of people being blacklisted. It destroyed publishing companies, and it led to most, all of that is terrible. But worst of all, it led to a picture of Batman that was like the Batman we got in the Adam West stories. So like the silly, goofy, fun Batman and Robin, which is like the worst Batman. I mean, I kind of like the Adam West show, but still, it's like the worst Batman.
But that's done tongue in cheek. This was done as a result of taking the piss out of the darkness that made the Dark Knight
They had
dark,
to take
right?
nothing could be scary. Nothing. No corpses were not allowed. Ghouls were not allowed. Blood was not allowed.
I think you could even show like thievery, like you couldn't, even like small stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Even very, not benign crimes, but even like non-gory crimes. Like a guy in a striped shirt, breaking into a house at night was too, might be potentially. No one really knew what the line was. It was so, and it's fair to say it wasn't government censorship that, the comics industry bound together and created a comics code. It was government pressure. So it was, to an extent, it was government censorship in all but, fact, and all but, it was the result of government pressure. That fight about horror comics presaged every cultural fight we've had since then. It's always the same. Sometimes it gets very depressing to see that there's nothing original happens. It's the same stupid arguments made over and over again on junk science. It was comic books in the 60s. It was hair metal in the 1980s. It was violent video games in the 2000s. It was rap music in the 90s. And there's always some hyperventilating politicians backed by some semi-hysterical parent group who thinks that one standard of parenting is the standard of parenting you can apply to every kid. And some industry has to defend itself. And I think that the industries have become a little better actually about defending their cultural products and stuff. But it is very frustrating to see America just sort of recycle the same material over and over again. But anyway, all this is a huge distraction from what I was going to say, which is in the 90s, though, the Comics Code died. It still sort of existed, but it had no power anymore. Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore came in. They fixed comics. Horror comics are booming again. When Mark Doyle said, "Do you want to do horror comics?" and it can be sort of like Vertigo without the Vertigo title, I was like, absolutely. And we had a lot of fun.
You mentioned EC Comics and your love for them in the past. Did you ever get to meet any of those guys, any of those creators? I met Al Feldstein at Heroes Con, a long time ago. It was before he passed.
I have met Al Feldstein. I did meet Al Feldstein, yeah, at Comic-Con, yeah.
Yeah, he, just quiet, unassuming little guy, and I got him to sign a print for me. Of course, it's the classic guy in the suit with the grizzly, zombie behind him in the quicksand, and I was like, You're Al Feldstein. He kind of turned around. He was like, last time I checked, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm starstruck, sir. Could you sign this? And he's like, sure thing, kid.
Damn, he was Ben Grimm
those
and Jack Kirby together?
They all are somehow, because all those guys were working dudes. Like they weren't looking at it
exactly.
They weren't looking at it like some floofy do hipster. Like this will be worth something one day. Like it's like no,
it was like a blue collar job.
I got to put food on the table for my family, so I'm drawing a dude play baseball with another dude's head. Like this is what I'm doing.
Do you believe how good John Buscema was? And he drew like one of those pages every day.
Goodness,
he just drew he was a machine.
Yes.
No artist can draw at that level and do a page a day anymore. How could he do it? There's only one way he could do it. He was work for hire and he needed to keep food in the fridge.
That's it.
So it's like, I got to get this page done.
Yeah.
What was I going to say about that? I met Al Feldstein at San Diego Comic-Con. I met Ray Bradbury there before he died.
Wow, that's great.
And I remember pointing at all of it and saying, all of this is your fault. My favorite my favorite EC comic story is they were publishing a lot. They didn't have enough material. And so they began stealing Bradbury stories and just doing Bradbury stories, as their own and doing them comics. They didn't know that Bradbury read their comics. So Bradbury found that they had been ripping off his stories. Now, he could have called a lawyer, but that's not what he did. Instead, he wrote a letter to William Gaines. And he said, I just loved the adaptation of, Sound of Thunder.
Nice.
It came out so beautifully. You'll have to reach out to the accounting department because the check got lost in the mail. I haven't received a check yet for the adaptation. And William Gaines saw that and was like, wrote him back and is like, the checks are on the way and we'd like to talk about adapting more. So he moved fast to like, okay, wait a second, I'm not going to let this go. So anyway, I love Tales from the Crypt. I loved, all the EC titles, and my dad had all of them in hardcover. They were reprinted in the 1980s in beautiful hardcover editions, oversized editions. And so when other kids were reading like, I don't know, Avengers and stuff, I was reading Tales from the Crypt. I was reading, I give Frederick Wortham a hard time, because he said, it's going to mess kids up. It's going to warp them for life. Actually, he was right, though. Look at me. I mean, I write about dead bodies for a living. I mean, so maybe he had a point, actually.
So I got to ask now, was there anything in your house that was taboo? Has anybody asked this question? Like, was there anything you weren't allowed? Like, yo, okay, Joe, no. We're not doing this in the house. You can't read this. You can't watch this.
No. By the time I was 12, I had seen Dawn of the Dead a dozen times.
Outstanding.
And I remember, I love the film. I had the Steve Jackson board game too, which I loved playing. And I was just insane I was a deadhead. And I remember for my 12th birthday asking if all my friends could come over and watch Dawn of the Dead. And my parents were like, sure, why not? So I threw it on and I was watching it and I'd seen it a million times. I just absolutely loved it. I'm like, eating the popcorn and watched away. And I didn't notice that one by one my friends were leaving the room. Until finally, about an hour into the film, I looked around and the only friend left was my buddy Brian Hannon, who was just lathered in sweat. And he said, I don't think we ought to be watching this. And then he left the room. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to watch the rest of the film by myself. So I did. So that was how I finished my 12th birthday.
That sounds like a very similar story to when Cesar had me watch Tusk with him.
First off,
you psycho motherfucker.
First off, you're not the first person I've done that with, and I totally relate, Joe. I'm that guy that's got a Wendy's triple in his hand while Evil Dead 1 is playing, and all
laughing, just laughing,
and all the gross stuff's coming out in fluids. And yeah, it's corny, but if you've never seen it before, it is pretty visceral. If you're not a horror person.
So, what's funny is I have a lot of friends who write horror fiction or make horror films, who love the genre. And sometimes, a few of us will all go see a horror film together. And the interesting thing about that is, things will happen some demented hillbilly will, whack someone's head off with an axe and the whole theater screams, except for me and my buds, because we're all laughing. And I know that's a fucked up response, but I think that when you really love the genre, you're kind of in on the joke. And so the stuff that is normally scary is actually very funny and exciting. And you're sort of like, this is hilarious. I love that. That was great. I'd like to see that scene again. I respond to horror films. I'm still very easily scared. I jump, I cry out. I am a great person to watch a horror film with because I react. But I also laugh a lot, I'm the classic reaction is I just about jump out of my shoes and then, in fright and then fall back on the couch and I start laughing.
Yeah, it's so rewarding to still be that way with the genre. And I think a lot of times people, at least I can't speak for everybody. I'll speak for myself, that the relationship between, I guess, what makes us sort of animals is sort of like being able to look at the dark side, right? Like if if you're exposed to a horror movie when you're little, and there's that little part of you that sees the world for not like the way it is, but like kinda like you're like, oh, we're all like capable of bad things, but not everybody is a monster. But if you can learn to recognize the darkness and, without getting too meta here, embrace it a little in your own life to help you become a better person, then the more you get exposed to it, the less it scares you and the more insight you get, at least me personally, from scary movies or horror in general as a genre. So seeing like say a movie like Devil's Rejects, where you would see a hillbilly hack somebody, with the scenario you just described, you could get the laugh because, like you said, not only are you in on the joke, but you're like, yeah, people are like that. Like 100% people are like that. And
Green Inferno, Eli Roth's Green Inferno is so fucked up. And I laughed harder watching Green Inferno than, many a comedy. And I'm not proud of that response, but it's just, I was going to say, I am friends with a fellow named Matthias Claesson, who is a Danish literary theorist, who specializes in horror. And Matthias wrote a book called How Horror Seduces. Anyone who is a serious fan of the genre will, I think, find that a kind of mind-blowing read, a remarkable read.
Okay.
It's the best nonfiction work about the genre in decades. But if you want to know why we love horror, the answer is evolution. Evolution is almost always the answer to whatever the question is. Evolution almost always turns out to be the answer. So I mentioned at the beginning, I have 18-month-old twins. And what the twins love is when I get down on the floor and I drum my hands and I go, ugh, and then they run for me. They squeal with laughter and they run. And they like that. And I'll come around a corner, ugh, and they squeal and they run away. That's their favorite thing. They can do that for hours. But you have to ask yourself, why? Why do they want dad to sort of put on a scary face and be silly and sort of chase it? Why do they want to run? Why do they want to play a game where I'm like a predator chasing them and they're like the prey trying to escape? And that's the answer right there, because for hundreds of thousands of years, we were the prey and there were predators. And just like puppies play fight, babies through play deal with potentially terrifying scenarios. So in play, they can safely explore a frightening scenario like, what if an animal was after me? What would I do? I would run. Dad is pretending to be an animal and I'm going to run. This is really fun. But in the wild, it's possible that at some point they might actually see a dangerous animal and then they need to be ready to run. And you can take that and expand that outward into horror fiction. Why do we love horror fiction? Because we can use horror comics or movies or novels as a playground for our imagination. And in the safe playground of our imagination, we can explore scenarios that actually we wouldn't want to live through. You wouldn't really want to be prisoner of that family in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it's probably not going to happen. But through horror fiction, you can begin to think about what you might do if it did. And if all that sounds like a reach, if it sounds like I'm reaching a little bit, one of Matthias's studies, got a lot of international attention. Him and his co-authors were able to show that during the pandemic lockdown, horror fiction fans fared better emotionally than people who don't like horror fiction. If you loved horror films and you loved horror novels, during the lockdown, you almost certainly fared better emotionally than people who hate horror. When you ask yourself, well, why? Why? I think the answer is because horror fans have already lived it. They've already had a chance to think about, what would I do if there was a dangerous pathogen? They've read The Stand. They read Andromeda Strain. They've seen Dawn of the Dead. With infected people walking around trying to bite other people and infect them. And so I think with all that in mind, it's not that surprising to find that horror fiction fans were able to look at the threat of COVID-19 and say, okay,
Been there, done that.
yeah, been there, done that. I'm ready.
I do want to turn the corner here and go back to Hill House.
Sure.
You mentioned curating, like the line. And what does that mean in terms of comics?
Let me just note that the marketing team at DC is also glad that you were turning the conversation back to the Hill House titles. From the bottom of their heart, the marketing team at DC would like to thank you from the bottom of your heart. That
Look, look, this is, it's funny. I always make fun of Botter for being like a huge Marvel head and shilling out to Marvel. It's not true, but we both have like little inside jokes about how much we love the House of Ideas.
Yeah.
But the fact that Mr. Marvel here is like, please, Joe, please, can we go back to talking to DC? For God's sakes, let's go back. Look.
But in a lot of ways, when it comes to superheroes, I'm a Marvel guy. I've always been a Marvel guy,
Don't isolate that quote.
My comic book collection began with me tracking down the Claremont Byrne X-Men. So I wanted the complete Claremont Byrne. So that's how I became a comic collector, was, collecting everything that culminated in the Dark Phoenix storyline. It was just, and Spider-Man 2, was like, I just grew up, loving Spider-Man like so many other kids. It was just, that was my comic.
Hit him with it.
The DC marketing team right now is like, God damn it.
I know, it's killing them.
As far as being a curator is concerned, because we just got done talking about how awesome horror is and how cool it is to get nerdy about it on a psychological level. Do you find there's sort of like a heavy is the crown sort of thing where you're like looking for things and...
No, and I'm going to say something that will please the DC marketing.
Let's do it.
Which is, when you're ready for an adult scary comic, it's time to leave Marvel behind and go check out what's happening at DC. If you want to watch people in brightly colored, underpants, making jokes and, punching supervillains, Marvel's great, But once it's time for something with adult themes that are really scary, that talks about people's, sexual lives and adult lives and, grief and pain and mortal fear, then you're going to want to turn to something that's a little more grown up. And that's DC Comics. That's the Vertigo line. That's Swamp Thing and Hellblazer and, all those great titles, Arkham Asylum and
House of Mystery.
House of Mystery, absolutely.
Hell, I'll throw in Shade the Changing Man just for fun.
All right.
I don't know, we might be pushing it too far there, but so it was one of the great pleasures of my career that we were able to do a Locke and Key story that crossed over into Neil's Sandman universe, which is the Locke and Key Hell and Gone series, and was such a blast to write, and Gabe took it to another level, which is really saying something if you've ever seen any of Gabe's, earlier art, but then, he just rose to a whole new level, and it's, that was great. As far as Hill House went, it was a lot of fun. I got to work with some seasoned hands, people who were really terrific. I got to work with Mike Carey, who is a terrific British horror and science fiction writer, probably best known for a novel called The Girl with All the Gifts that was made into a pretty good little zombie film. I got to work with Stuart Immonen, which still blows my mind. He's astonishing talent. And I remember talking to Mark Doyle, and he said, he'd seen this first script for Plunge, and he said, "Who do you want to get for the art?" And I said, "Can we get anyone who can draw like Stuart Immonen?" And Mark Doyle was like, "I think we can get someone who draws like Stuart Immonen." And before I knew it, he was drawing the comics. So that was great. And I'm trying to think. It's been a fun run. Carmen Machado did. I want to apologize to her for just absolutely fucking mangling her name there, but she did The Lolo Woods, which is a really, beautiful, scary and vivid, and there's never been a comic like it. That's one I'd like to see. I hope we'll see that one adapted for film or something sometime soon, because it's really great art by Danny, who just, drew the hell out of it. And, so we had a chance to do, 5 or 6 books for, Hill House. And, I I found it profoundly gratifying, and I thought we came up with some really good, scary stuff. It was like I got to run Blumhouse for a couple of years, only instead of making movies, we were doing comics. I got to be Jason Blum for like 2 years.
Pretty cool.
And I did some cheerleading, and occasionally I did some light editing and stuff. But I found I was working with pros. I was working with great storytellers. I didn't really have to do a whole lot except, tell them to keep it coming and write my own titles.
Did you have the Stanley mustache or even the large sort of aviator glasses? And
Yeah. No, I have trouble pulling off the mustache. It doesn't really. And what I really want is I want one of these hipster lumberjack beards. But
You got the flannel.
I mean, go for it.
But I can't really pull it off. I've never been able to. It's like my beard comes out a little ways and then just quits.
I feel
it
you.
loses its will to live.
Mine is
Joe,
Patch City.
let's not pretend we haven't seen the jacket covers on some of the novels where you're rocking a sweet, sweet beard. And
It's not that lumberjack thing that where it projects. I want the one that projects.
okay, well, that's fair. That's fair. You want to look like Sasquatch from Alpha Flight. I understand.
Yeah.
Joe, I want to play a game with you because you're bringing
Sure.
up some of these titles that have come out through Hill House, and you've mentioned some of the titles, so let's just dive into it. I want to hear what words or anecdotes or stories, what immediately comes to mind when I say some of these names.
Okay,
It's going to be
good.
It's going to be a mix of like creative partners that you've worked with in Hill House and just some of the titles that have come out through Hill House. And I'm very excited to hear your thoughts or reaction to this.
Talentless asshole. No.
I want to hear. I'm going to say Leo Max, who is the artist for Basket Full of Heads. Your first.
Oh, I
title
love
out of
Leo
House.
Max. I love Leo Max, and he was so great. He was so great on Basket Full of Heads. He was especially great when we were about 3 issues in, and he was going to draw 6 issues, and then we were 3 issues in. And I was like, "Do you think you could draw 7? Because I can't finish the story in 6 issues." And DC was like, "We're going 7? Okay, we're going 7." So I think even the first couple issues even say on the cover somewhere, issue 1 of the 6-issue limited series, and then it gets to issue 3, and it's like issue 3 of the 7-issue limited series.
That's awesome.
But Leo Max is really great. I love that the comic sort of looked like, one of these 1970s horror films. Kind of had the golden hued look of something like Jaws, or the kind of grain, the kind of visual grain of something like The Exorcist. So he was terrific to work with, and he's also, it also has a feel of like, one of these European comic books where the art is both a little more graphic. You're going to go places that are a little more extreme than you're used to, but it's also sort of, comic booky, kind of, a little absurd, a little silly. And I love that too.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say for a lot of folks that was my introduction to, your comic book stuff. And I admitted to you, like I only started reading Locke Key like a month prior to you coming down for that Lit Chat interview. It blew me away. But Basket Full of Heads was, I think, my first introduction to your comic book stuff. And Leo Max, I want to say this might have been his first like American comic book work, but the dude has been
I don't know
since then.
Yeah, he's great, and I have to say, if someone has never read any of my stuff and wants to get into my comic stuff, hey, you could do a lot worse than start with Basket Full of Heads. I think Basket Full of Heads is a pretty good, introduction to my stuff. It's, the comic worked in the sense of it is a horror story that's a little silly, that's I wanted it to feel like one of these kind of funny 80s gross out films like, Reanimator or Evil Dead 2, and so it sort of has an over the top quality to it. But beneath that, there's a lot of gore. There's a basket full of talking severed heads. There's a lot of stuff going on. Beneath that, it's actually structured like a pretty classical mystery with misdirections and red herrings. And then I think a pretty good final reveal. So I'm proud of the way it came out. Go ahead. You hit me with the next name.
Okay, I'm gonna switch from a creator to a title that's on Hill House. I'm gonna say the Dollhouse Family. What comes to mind when I say that?
Yeah. So, what comes to mind when you say that? Dollhouses are scary. I just think dollhouses are naturally lend themselves to horror. if you're watching a horror film and a child is like goes up the stairs into the attic and there's a dollhouse there, you're like, don't touch it.
Yeah.
You just know it's bad, And Mike Carey brought the skills of a novelist to his 6 issues. He tells a story that takes place in 2 or 3 different shifting time frames. It has some great covers. That series, those individual issues had some great covers that were almost like photo effect covers with like puppets and stuff on them, little puppet dolls and everything. And really, you got your money's worth just with the covers. Yeah. So that was a good one.
All right, let me stick on a title. Let me go to another title. Daphne Byrne by Laura Marks and Kelly Jones, the iconic Kelly Jones.
Yeah, the gloriously pervy Kelly Jones. No one is better at working a dick into a panel than Kelly Jones.
This is the short box listeners. This is why you signed up.
Soundbite.
I would argue there's no artist in all of comics who's better at subtly working a dick into a page of comics than Kelly Jones. It was always my dream to work with him. He's just as awesome as I thought. He's just as awesome as I thought he would be. I have loved every page of his art, like life itself. I have, well before I ever met him, I was able to buy some pages of Dead Man art that he did. It's this Dead Man series set at a circus. I just love that. Laura Marks is a TV writer who worked on one of the iterations of Locke Key, and she's a playwright. And I loved what she did with Daphne Byrne, which I also think is kind of like Daphne Byrne is almost like a 19th century, like a Victorian reimagining, a Victorian feminist reimagining of The Omen. I think if there's one of the Hill House series that sometimes gets overlooked, it's Daphne Byrne, but that's a really good one.
This man said he is the best at subtly working in a dick, and then proceeds to go, it was my dream to work with him. It was my absolute dream to work with him. It sounds like something Robert Evans would say. Like I can see it's like, the thing about Kelly Jones, baby, is that he was good at drawing dicks. And it was a pleasure to work with him.
Top of the mountain, baby. Top of the mountain.
No one you know got into the comics business because they suffered from too much maturity.
Well said.
Facts.
This next name, you've spoken a little bit about him, but me and C are such big fans of his. I just want to hear you talk more about it. Stuart Immonen. I mean, how was it to actually work with him and get the pages and all that?
Tell us, Joe.
It was amazing. It was amazing. I am proud of the way Plunge came out, and I think it's a really good comic. I wish that my writing had been up to the level of his art. I think that that Stuart delivered, one brilliant page after another. You look at his pages and you're like, this is one of the 6 or 7 best artists in comics right now. There are very few people who can work at the level he's working at. And I think the story of Plunge works and is a good story with some good characters and some great moments. And, I love when readers discover it. And I think there's a whole set of readers where it's like, it's just right in the sweet spot. But I never thought my scripts were up to the level of his art. If I ever get a chance to take another swing, and work with Stuart again, I would love to try to deliver something even better than Plunge because, it's such a great thing to get to work with a legend like Stuart, and it was so inspiring to see his pages coming in, and I was very fortunate to get to team up with him for a few issues.
Damn, I really appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, no, he's like one of those guys that's artistically a chameleon. Like he's the T-1000 of comic book artists. Like you could tell him hey, draw in this style, photorealistic, and he's just like calibrating. And now he's got this beautiful photorealistic style that could rival Neil Adams any day of the week. And then then you're like, okay, give me some more graphic. Give me Liechtenstein, baby. And then he'll just go recalibrating, and now it's very, very pop, very super, super poppy. And you're like, how is this the same person? How can he do this? It's like Art Deco, go, boop, and then it's freaking phenomenal. If anybody's listening who's never seen any of Stewart's work, check out the DC Hill House line there, maybe. Check out Plunge, and then dive deep into Stewart's work. Like he's freaking
Next Wave.
It's crazy.
X-Men stuff,
oh, come on.
Don't even get me started.
Yeah.
No, classic. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, appreciate it.
What's next for Hill House? Like, what's on the horizon? Any upcoming projects, creators coming on board?
Yeah.
Can you share anything?
Well, now we're going to take a turn into sad territory. It's all been fun until here. I'm actually out of comics for the next few years.
Oh, wow.
I've written 4 novels, and I'd like to have at least 10 novels before I'm done being a novelist. I'd like to write at least another 6 novels. And so right now that's my complete focus, is getting the next couple novels written. The next novel, King Sorrow, is done and I'm revising it now. I've got 100 pages of the book that will follow that one, which is called Hunger. And I just want to stack up the next 2 or 3 novels before I get back to comics. And so I think it's going to be a few years. There's some possible exceptions. Chris Ryle has been adapting the novellas from my book Strange Weather for Image. And I would love to script one of those adaptations myself. It would be an adaptation of a novella called Loaded. It's actually set in Florida. That's something I'd love to do. And Zach Howard, who illustrated The Cape, which is an adaptation of one of my stories, has said that he'd like to draw it. And so it would be a chance for Zach and I to work together. And, so that's something. But even if I write that I probably won't, that might not be until late 2024 or even 2025. There is a small possibility that Gabe and I have talked for years about a whole nother 6-book run of Locke and Key that would be called World War Key, that would jump back and forth between Key House's past and Key House's present and pick up with some characters after the events of the original run. It might happen. I hope it will happen. And if it does happen, if it doesn't happen in the next couple of years, it could still happen 5 or 6 years down the road.
Sure.
But Locke and Key is a big commitment. We've done some really good books. I wouldn't want to let readers down by doing anything less than giving it my full attention, and I can't do that really while I'm working on the novels. Additionally, Locke and Key, I co-own Locke and Key with IDW Comics. IDW Comics is not in financially good shape, as far as I can tell. I only know what I see from the outside, but it's my sense that it's not a company that's as financially secure as one would hope. That they have struggled a little bit in the last couple of years over the pandemic and so on. I'm rooting for them to get back on their feet and stuff, but I don't know what the future of Locke and Key looks like, because I don't know what the future of IDW Comics looks like. So there's a bunch of there are several cross currents which make it hard to predict about what there might be for the future of Locke and Key. And I'm rooting for IDW, and I certainly hope everything works out, and wouldn't hesitate to work with them again if the window opened and if it looked like, we could put together a good package, and, who knows? It's very hard to predict the future. But certainly, aside from any other questions, I got a couple novels to write, so that's what I've got to do the next few years. So the last Hill House title was Refrigerator Full of Heads, which was a sequel written by Rio Ures to A Basket Full of Heads. It has, at one point in the comic, there's a pickup truck with the severed head of a great white shark attached to it by log chains. And the great white shark's head is still magically alive and eating people. And so, I know people want to read that comic. They want to see that truck with the shark on it. So Hill House went out with a bang. It had a great final story, and no regrets. We left it all on the field. We're back to sports again.
There you go.
Joe, well, let me ask you this then. Just on some, fanboy fantasy shit right here. If you were given the opportunity to write one character with one or the creative team of your choosing, whether it be from the big two or any character within comics, who would that be? Who would get you out of quasi hibernation?
What a very big question of you to ask.
Well, so the answer is, unfortunately, nothing would get me out of quasi hibernation, because the goal is to get these next few novels written. It doesn't matter what I was offered. If the window was open to doing comics for free reign, for DC it would be Superman, and for Marvel it would be Captain America.
Interesting.
Because I know my profile as I write the scary stuff, but I sort of want to write about that hero who represents the best of what we can be. Someone whose basic decency is unquestionable. Someone with a strong moral compass, who has almost like a childlike belief in right and wrong, in helping people, standing up for kindness and decency. And I'm a cornball, and I find that really moving and powerful, and would love to explore that with one of those big iconic American characters like Superman or Captain America, which in my mind are very similar, actually.
That's not corny at all, man. You know what you sound like? You sound like someone who read comics in the 90s. I'm speaking from experience, and I've had my fill of deconstruction, and I like it. I like it a lot, but it takes. Botter can tell you that my favorite comic book is Astro City, simply because it deals with sort of a reconstructionist view of that sort of stuff, tropes that you've seen before that have been picked apart, and like hyenas on the Serengeti, like just mangled superheroes,
So if you're with the DC Warner Brothers marketing team, this has been a great podcast, and it's over. You can turn it off now. Nothing left to listen to. It was terrific. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, DC. Thank you, Warner Brothers. It's over. Time to turn something else on. So the gritty DC films, like after a while, there was so much grit. It was like grit in my eyes. And I mean, do we really want a gritty Superman? A Superman who's like breaking necks and stuff like that. Like, I think I love the Nolan Batman films. I am down with, darker, more adult takes on comic books and stuff. But I definitely think that the DC universe on screen, as depicted, beginning with sort of like Man of Steel, and through, has not really been a lot of fun. And that's why, right? Because it's like, it's just, this is realism, man. This is like super, and I'm like, no, it's not realism. It's a bunch of guys in capes, and so I admire them for wanting to do something that was not Marvel, by trying to make something distinct. And I do think they had successes, in particular, the first Wonder Woman film, which wasn't gritty, wasn't like, it was like an embodiment of the character. It was, as both, they were like, actually, let's just do, a movie that's really true to the character and stuff. And it was amazing. It was great. I think some of the films that have existed outside that DC universe, Joker comes to mind. I thought, I know Joker has like kind of a bad rap on social media, but I thought it was like the Scorsese films from the 70s. I thought it was like King of Comedy or Taxi Driver. I was totally into it, and I dug what it was trying to do. And
was it Todd Howard?
I'll be right. I don't know.
Howard direct
I'll be right there to see the next one. The next one's got Lady Gaga in it. It's Harley Quinn. It's like going to be done as a musical. And Joaquin Phoenix was amazing. And so I think that some of their experiments outside of that main line of the DC universe have been really good. I heard Suicide Squad was awesome. It's James Gunn. I haven't seen that one. So I'd really like to check that one. I heard it was great.
It's fun.
It is excellent. It's like one of my favorite superhero films in a long time. Like, blew my expectations.
I heard Peacemaker. I heard Peacemaker was great too. And
it's freaking hilarious. Yeah. So good.
You cannot go wrong with Suicide Squad. and the Peacemaker show.
And Peacemaker. So I should watch them together, right? You watch Suicide Squad and then you watch Peacemaker.
Because it leads into
I want to watch.
But...
Yeah, I'm down for that. I'm down.
And you're only doing yourself a favor, I guarantee you.
Well, you mentioned Grant Morrison and the British invasion, right? Like it's interesting that guy who he's thrown his hat in the arena of deconstructing superheroes, but then because he's so magical and whimsical, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, magic with a K, and I love that man so much.
Yeah.
He takes Superman and he makes him like sort of he creates a magical sigil and brings out all the hermetic energy from Superman and then just says, here you go, populace, enjoy your superhero as the Buddha. Because if he is godlike,
All-Star Superman is it's one of my favorite comics of all time.
Yeah.
So just a couple things. So the best Superman movies, the top 3 are Superman 2 with Chris Reeves, the first Superman with Chris Reeves, and then the trailer for Man of Steel. The 5-minute trailer for Man of Steel that includes Russell Crowe essentially reading Grant Morrison's bit from All-Star Superman, where he's like, one day they will follow you into the light. I mean, just thinking about it, I get all these goosebumps on me. I'm ready to start crying.
I forgot about that trailer.
Dude, when Kevin Costner is like talking to him, he's like, can I just keep pretending to be your son? He goes, you are my son. And he hugs him. I was like, yes.
So let me just say, I have a wonderful dad. I love my dad. I wouldn't trade him for anything. But if I had to pick a second dad,
yes,
I'd pick Kevin Costner from Man of Steel, because I've sort of always wanted Kevin Costner to hug me, and then I can ask him, "Can we just pretend I'm your son?" And he can get like that choke in his voice, and he could stroke my head and say, "You are my son." That would be fucking awesome.
Oh my gosh.
That would be the absolute best.
I just want him to hold his hand up against me.
Well, guys, you've been listening to Daddy Issues, the podcast. Thank you for thanks for tuning in. Our guest has been Joe Hill, and we'll be back with cookies next week, and we'll just cry it out. Thanks for coming.
Next week we'll have Christina Aguilera on the show as well.
Oh shit.
Joe, I got one more question for you to wrap this up. This excellent conversation at that. We're coming up on 20 years since your first short story collection, 20th Century Ghost, since it's been published. And I'm sure not even sure, I know that we have a lot of aspiring writers and comic creators listening to the show. And I always like to end on this note right here. But what words of wisdom or advice would you give to someone listening right now that wants to be, that wants to get published or enter the industry, maybe based on something like you wish you would have been told as you were entering the industry? Like, do you have any advice or tips or anecdotes to share?
We're wrapping things up, and this is the place for me to say something inspirational,
profound, no pressure, Joe.
And I'm drawing an absolute blank. I mean, read a lot, read widely. I guess I think it's important to recognize what you love, because if if there's something you love, you can write that. You can't write something because you think it's going to sell. You can cause that's not enough to keep going. It's too empty. You have to figure what absolutely pumps up your gonads, and that's what you're going to write. See, I did find something inspirational. Inspirational to say at the end.
I don't think I've ever seen an inspirational quote with the word gonads in it, but I'm here for it.
Sweetheart, Joe Hill said I need to pump up my gonads. And by God, I'm going to write the great American novel.
Right. The other thing I would say is, if you ever find yourself stuck, I get asked a lot about writer's block. And, I've known for a lot of years that writer's block isn't a real thing, that it doesn't really exist. When you get stuck, it's because there's something you want to write and you're not giving yourself permission to write it. Because you're thinking, oh, what if my mom read it? What if my mom read it and then found out the truth about me? First of all, your mom already knows, and second of all, if you don't write the thing that's burning a hole in you, your creativity, your imagination will just take its fall and go home. It will just say, we're writing this or we're not writing anything. So you have to follow that. You have to follow their things, if you want to write, there are things you love, there are things that excite you, you have enthusiasms, there are things that terrify you deeply, that you have to go into that place and face those things and spend time with them. And if you can do that every day, and also if you can read a lot, especially the stuff you love, though, if you're not, if you're out of school, if you're not in college, you're not in high school anymore, it's time to stop doing homework. It's time to stop reading books that you think other people want you to read, or to read books because you think it's worthy, because you think it's going to impress someone. Don't read a book because you think, I don't know, it's going to make you a superior intellect. Just read a book because you think it's going to be fucking awesome, because it's like, you love horror novels. And so you're going to read one, and then you're going to read another one. Read the stuff that psychs you up, and you can almost always, that is a trail of breadcrumbs through the woods that will lead you where you want to go. Or will lead you to a house made of gingerbread where an old woman will shove you in an oven and eat you, But one way or another, you're going to get someplace interesting.
Somewhere LeVar Burton is like, fuck yeah.
Yeah, it's like, but you don't have to take my word for it.
That was really well said. Joe, this has been one of, I think, this is a Hall of Fame interview right here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for spending time with us, and thank your family for us, to letting us, take you for a while and talk about lizard brains and all kinds of stuff.
It was a lot of fun.
Joe, one last thing. I'm gonna have links to your socials, to the website. That'll be all posted in the show notes. But do you have anything else you wanna plug or say to the listeners before we wrap up?
Well, I got a short story, an Amazon original right now called Pram. That's part of their Creature Feature collection. That includes new short stories by Josh Malerman and Grady Hendrix and Paul Tremblay and Jason Mott and Chandler Baker. It's a really fun collection. I hope people will check it out. The Hill House books have all been collected into trade paperbacks, and I think if you buy the box set, you can get the backup feature called Sea Dogs, which is a fact-based story about how America beat the British Empire by using werewolves during the Revolution, and it's all true. And I hope that people have a great Halloween, and get a good scary film in, and stay safe, and make sure to eat plenty of your kids' candy. Make sure none of it's poisoned, and take care of yourselves. Be well.
That's the way to do it. Joe, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much. You're always welcome on the Short Box.
Yeah, man, your family.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, man.